It was an unusually warm summer evening in Austin, even for Texas. The air, soaked by the heat of the afternoon sun, was cooling slowly, but the streets were beginning to fill with the coolness of the night. In El Ranchito, a small family-run restaurant, music was playing and the smell of corn tortillas and roasted meat. At one of the tables by the window sat Jessica Harper and her 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Jessica looked tired, but tried to keep her smile for her daughter's sake. Lily was saying something animated, waving her arms around, while her mother absent-mindedly picked at her plate with her fork. She had hardly eaten at all. Something had been bothering her in recent weeks, but she didn't want to worry Lily. The girl, in her childish, naive world, didn't notice that her mother was looking out the window more and more often, as if afraid of someone. In the parking lot behind the restaurant, in the shadow of an old streetlight, stood a dark SUV. Its engine was idling, and a man sat inside, watching them closely. At 8:47 p.m., Jessica paid and took Lily's hand. They walked outside, got into their old blue Toyota Corolla, and drove out of the parking lot. The SUV slowly followed them. After driving a few blocks, Jessica's car turned toward a suburban highway. It was an odd route. Her house was in the other direction. A traffic camera recorded the car at 9:02 p.m., but 15 minutes later its signal was gone. At 9:45 p.m., their car was found on a deserted country road 5 miles outside of town. When police arrived on the scene, the picture looked strange. The car was closed but not locked. Inside, Jessica's cell phone lay on the front seat, screen smashed, battery dead. In the back seat was Lily's doll with her arm ripped out. No sign of a struggle, no blood, no sign of anything in the vicinity. Security cameras were out of service on that stretch of road. It was immediately clear that this was no ordinary robbery. The woman and the child simply disappeared, as if vanished into the night. The police questioned the restaurant staff, but no one saw anything suspicious. The owner of the place recalled that Jessica seemed worried, but when he asked if she was all right, she only gave a strained smile. The waitress who served their table didn't notice anything unusual either, except that Jessica interrupted their conversation several times to look out the window. The usual methods of investigation were inconclusive. Police investigated the car's route but found no leads. Jessica's friends and family could not recall her talking about any threats or problems. A search of the house yielded nothing. Everything was in its place. No signs of forced entry. Her bank accounts remained untouched, her phone activity cut off exactly at the moment of her disappearance. The investigation was at a standstill. Police began to lean toward an escape theory. Perhaps Jessica decided to disappear on her own. But if that's the case, why leave the phone behind? Why was Lily's doll damaged? And most importantly, why didn't anyone see what happened? Jessica's relatives, not believing the police's version of events, turned to a private investigator. Edgar Ed Miller took the case. A former IT guy, he's never worked with traditional methods. His strength is digital analytics, hacking into systems and studying behavioral patterns. Where others saw dead ends, he saw patterns. And he was certain this wasn't a simple disappearance. There was something more behind it. Edgar Miller gazed into the light of the screens as the city outside the window slipped into night. At times like this, he felt like a predator stalking prey in a digital world. He knew that no one disappeared without a trace these days. There was always at least the slightest trace left in surveillance cameras, phone records, bank transactions. It's just a matter of getting the dots right. The first thing he did was pull up Jessica's phone records. The last call had been made 2 hours before she disappeared. A brief conversation with her friend, Melissa. The conversation hadn't lasted more than 3 minutes, and there had been nothing disturbing about it, a normal exchange of news. But after that, silence. Not a single call, not a single text. It was strange. Jessica always kept her phone with her, especially when she was with her daughter. He studied her searches over the past weeks. Several times she'd searched for information about custody proceedings. That was alarming. Was it a coincidence? Or was she afraid someone was trying to take her daughter away from her? He studied her searches over the past weeks. Several times she'd searched for information about custody proceedings. That was alarming. Was it a coincidence? Or was she afraid someone was trying to take her daughter away from her? Next, Ed turned his attention to her car's routes. The tracking system recorded that after the restaurant, Jessica didn't turn onto the road leading home, but drove in the opposite direction. 20 minutes later, her car pulled up outside the old Desert View Motel. This place hadn't been popular for a long time. Even truckers avoided it. Surveillance footage showed her car pulling into the parking lot and stalling outside one of the buildings. But a few minutes later, the image abruptly cut off. Ed squinted, rewinding the tape over and over. At first, everything was normal. Headlights illuminating the asphalt, Jessica probably looking for something on her phone. Then, there was a sharp jump in the image, and then darkness. Someone had turned off the camera. Was it an accident, or did someone know they were being filmed? Ed switched to the satellite images taken that night. He traced the path of her car. The faint glow of headlights stood out on the road leading toward the desert, but something didn't add up. 40 minutes after arriving at the motel, the car reappeared on the highway. But it was driven by someone else. The police had already considered kidnapping, but they couldn't find any suspects. The lack of witnesses and direct evidence had stalled their investigation. But Ed knew that if they dug deeper, they'd find the answers. Jack River, Jessica's ex-boyfriend, had looked like a suitable suspect from the start. He'd been trying to get custody of Lily for a long time, suing, hiring lawyers. However, the court sided with Jessica, denying him rights to the child. He had recently filed a lawsuit again, but it had been dismissed again. Edgar mentally noted that the man had a motive. But when he checked Jack's alibi, it turned out that he had been at home at the time of Jessica's disappearance. Surveillance cameras outside his house recorded him coming home from work and then going out for a smoke. Every move he made was recorded, which completely eliminated him from the list of possible perpetrators. But there was more to the story than that. Ed turned his attention to Jack's wife, Mary. Her online footprints were blurred, minimal photos, no active accounts, as if she was deliberately avoiding publicity. Her bank transactions, however, said more than any words could. 2 days before Jessica disappeared, Mary transferred a large sum of money to an unknown offshore account. Ed zoomed in on the screen, reading the details of the transaction. Who was she paying? And for what? Mary seemed to be hiding something, or covering up for someone. Ed felt he was getting closer to the truth. Edgar continued to dig through the financial records. Money transfers always leave a trail, even if they've been covered up. He discovered that Jack River had transferred large sums of money several times in the last 3 months to offshore accounts registered to shell companies. The amounts weren't huge, but the regularity of these payments raised questions. What did Jack need the offshore accounts for? Was he paying someone for a favor, or was he hiding money from someone? At the same time, Ed gained access to the surveillance cameras installed outside Jack's house. He scrolled through the footage night after night, and one of them caught his eye. 2:37 a.m. On the screen, Jack walks out of the house, illuminated by the dim light of a flashlight. He looks around as if checking for prying eyes. Then walks to his car, opens the trunk, and goes back inside. A few minutes later, he comes out again, this time with a suitcase. Edgar slowed down the tape, squinting. The suitcase looked heavy. Jack loads it into the car, slams the trunk shut, then gets behind the wheel and drives away. But where to? Using satellite images taken that night, Ed traced the car's path. It was heading out of town, away from the busy highways, heading deeper into the desert. At one point, the car turned onto a barely visible dirt road and stopped near a structure. Ed zoomed in on the picture. Trailer. An old, dilapidated structure in the middle of nowhere. What was Jack doing there at night? There could only be one answer. Ed took everything he needed and went there himself. By the time he got to the right spot, the sun was already setting, casting the desert in a bloody glow. The inside of the trailer was in chaos. Things were strewn about, as if someone had panicked, looking for something important or trying to cover their tracks. A table had been overturned, drawers tossed, dishes broken. There were dark stains on the walls, but the most disturbing was the pool of dried blood on the floor. Ed walked in slowly, feeling his heart beat faster. This trailer was no longer just a suspicious place. It was a crime scene. He carefully walked around the room, noticing small details. There was a bloody handkerchief lying by the door, a fine cloth, not the sort of thing that would belong to a random vagrant. He picked it up, checking it against the photos he'd gotten from Jessica's family. The fabric, the embroidery, the color, it all matched. It was her shawl, but where had it disappeared to? Ed squinted, examining the floor. The blood trails weren't just there. They seemed to stretch toward the back door of the trailer. He followed them, but they cut off abruptly. as if someone had dragged the body outside and carried it away. Outside, the sand was tamped down, as if several people had fiddled around, but there were no obvious clues. Ed began his inspection more thoroughly. He walked around the trailer, checking every corner, looking under broken furniture. He found a knife with traces of dried blood in one of the kitchen drawers. The refrigerator was empty, just a carton of milk with an expired date. There was a dent on the wall near the door, as if it had been hit with a heavy object. The picture was getting more and more disturbing. Ed's attention was drawn to a laptop lying on the table among the trash. Its screen was black, but the power light was flickering. He carefully picked up the device, shook the dust off it. Password. Naturally, it wasn't a problem. The flash drive with the hacking program was always with him. He inserted it into the port, started the process. After a couple minutes, the screen came to life, and the desktop opened before the detective's eyes. Ed began to look around the desk. Between a pile of papers and empty bottles, he spotted a laptop. Its screen flickered, signaling that the system was locked. Password protected, that was his specialty. He pulled out a small flash drive, plugged it into the port, and started the hacking program. 3 minutes passed. The screen blinked, then the desktop opened. Files. Lots of files. Some had strange names, random sets of letters and numbers, but one stood out, a folder with a date that matched the day Jessica disappeared. Ed clicked. One single file, the video. He clicked play. The picture was of poor quality, taken on an old camera, probably set up for surveillance. First shadows flickered on the screen, then Jessica's face appeared. She looked frightened, her eyes darting from side to side. Her voice was muffled, but you could hear the tension in her tone. She was arguing with Jack. He stood across from her, arms crossed over his chest, his face tense. He looked concerned, but not threatening. But then Mary appeared in the frame. The woman moved slowly but surely. In her hand was a gun. Jessica recoiled, her lips moving. She said something, perhaps trying to negotiate, but Mary wasn't going to listen. She simply raised the weapon and pulled the trigger. A shot went off. Jessica went down. Ed froze. He rewound the video again, taking in every frame. There was no doubt it was a cold-blooded murder. But what happened next was even scarier. Jack first froze, then clutched his head. He clearly hadn't expected this turn of events. But Mary didn't give him time to think. She walked over to him, grabbed his shoulder, and said something sharply. Jack looked broken. A few seconds later, he was helping her clean up the body. Ed rewound the tape again. But where's Lily? He scrolled through the video looking for any hint of the child. Perhaps she was hidden in the next room? Perhaps she was already dead by now? Or maybe she wasn't there at all? His heart thudded in his chest. One thing Ed realized was that time was running out. He pulled out his cell phone, dialed the police number, and said in a steady voice, "I found them, but the girl's not there." With each passing hour, the chances of finding Lily dwindled. His heart thudded in his chest. Ed realized one thing. Time was running out. He pulled out his cell phone, dialed the police number, and said in a steady voice, "I found them, but the girl's not there." With each passing hour, the chances of finding Lily dwindled. Ed kept his eyes on Mary, trying to figure out if her confidence was a bluff or if she really knew Lily was gone forever. He studied every emotion, every tiny movement, but her face remained impenetrable. "You'll never find her," she repeated with a slight smile, as if savoring the moment. But Ed knew that if someone said, with such certainty, that a child was missing without a trace, then there were traces. They were just well hidden. The police continued to search, but the case was slowly cooling off. With no new leads, Lily was officially reported missing. To most people, that meant one thing: she was dead. But Ed didn't believe it. He kept digging through the records, studying the security cameras, looking for the slightest hint. 3 weeks later, he found what he was looking for. On one of the trucker's cameras mounted in the cab of the truck, he noticed something strange. In the middle of a highway at night, on the Texas-Mexico border, a tiny dark figure was recorded. A small silhouette of a girl walking along the road. There was something in her hands. A doll. Lily. Ed froze, his heart beating faster. "She's alive." He immediately contacted the police, but the truck was long gone and the recording had been made days ago. That meant one thing: Lily was out there somewhere, alone in a foreign country, scared and tired, probably in the hands of the people who'd driven her away. But Ed had a trail now. The story ended not with a dot, but with a multi-dot. He knew he wouldn't stop. He would find her. Because this wasn't just a case, it had become personal.